night, everything changed. Nobody expected the San Antonio Spurs to lose the NBA Finals this way. But what stunned the basketball world wasn't just the final score, it was what happened seconds after the buzzer. As Madison Square Garden erupted in celebration, and the New York Knicks completed a stunning 4-1 finals victory, Victor Wembanyama turned away, walked straight toward the tunnel, and left behind a moment that instantly ignited one of the biggest debates of his young career. Was this simply raw emotion from a devastated superstar, or was it the first public crack in the foundation of the NBA's brightest future? For months, the basketball world had crowned Wembanyama as the league's next unstoppable icon. Every highlight, every block, every impossible three-pointer fueled the belief that he wasn't just the future, he was already taking over the present. The Spurs looked ready to build another dynasty around their once-in-a-generation talent. But championships don't only reveal greatness, they expose weaknesses. And in the biggest series of his career, every camera captured not only Wembanyama's extraordinary talent, but also the immense pressure weighing on his shoulder. The finals quickly became more than Spurs versus Knicks. It became a battle between experience and expectation. New York played with relentless composure, while San Antonio struggled to protect double-digit leads that should have secured victories. Each collapse raised uncomfortable questions. Why did one of the league's most talented teams suddenly look so vulnerable when everything was on the line? Why did momentum keep slipping away? Then came the heartbreaking finish. As confetti covered the floor for New York, millions of fans weren't talking about the championship celebration. They were replaying Wembanyama's reaction over and over again. Television analysts, former players, social media personalities, and NBA fans immediately split into two camps. Some defended the young superstar, saying heartbreak affects everyone differently. Others argued that true franchise leaders stay on the court, face the disappointment, and show respect no matter how painful the loss. But here's where this story takes an even more dramatic turn. Behind every headline lies a much deeper question, one that reaches far beyond one emotional moment. Did the Spurs simply lose the finals? Or did this series expose problems that Gregg Popovich had quietly feared for months? And could this painful defeat become the defining turning point that shapes Victor Wembanyama's entire career? We're breaking down every controversy, every critical moment, and every hidden factor that transformed this finals into one of the most talked about NBA stories of the year. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you believe Wembanyama will come back stronger next season, type 1. If you think this finals exposed serious concerns about his leadership, type 2. And if you enjoy deep NBA stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next breakdown. The collapse. Nobody could ignore. The Spurs did not lose because they were outclassed from the opening tip. That is what made this finals so painful. San Antonio had control. They had leads. They had momentum. They had moments where Wembanyama looked like the most terrifying player on the floor. And still, again and again, everything slipped away. A young team can survive one blown lead. Two can be explained as nerves. But when the same pattern keeps repeating on the biggest stage, it becomes more than bad luck. It becomes identity. And for the Spurs, that identity became a team talented enough to dominate stretches, but not mature enough to close the door. The Knicks understood something San Antonio did not fully understand yet. Finals basketball is not about who looks better for 3 quarters. It is about who stays calm when the arena gets tight, when legs get heavy, when every possession feels like it could change history. New York had that calm. San Antonio did not. Wembanyama spoke afterward about the thin margin of error. He was right, but the hardest truth was this. The Spurs were not punished for one mistake. They were punished for repeated breakdowns, missed rotations, rushed shots, emotional reactions, possessions where the ball stopped moving, defensive moments where communication disappeared. And that is where the Popovich question became impossible to avoid. Because for nearly 3 decades, Gregg Popovich built teams that understood how to survive those moments. His Spurs were famous for discipline, patience, and execution. They did not panic. They did not chase the noise. They trusted the system. This version of San Antonio had the talent, but not the same control. And when the Knicks kept coming, the Spurs kept bending until they finally broke. The empty space where Pop used to stand. Gregg Popovich was not just a coach in San Antonio. He was the system. He was the voice that cut through panic. He was the person who could look at a young star and say exactly what needed to be said, even when nobody else wanted to say it. That is why his absence mattered so much. When Popovich stepped away from coaching because of health concerns, the Spurs did not just lose a play caller. They lost the person who understood how to manage pressure before it turned into chaos. They lost the man who protected young players from themselves. They lost the presence that made accountability feel normal instead of personal. Mitch Johnson did everything he could. He kept the team together. He helped guide San Antonio all the way to the finals. But replacing Popovich is not like replacing an assistant coach. You cannot copy 3 decades of authority overnight. You cannot inherit trust simply because your job title changes. And Wembanyama felt that gap. Pop still texted him. Pop still showed up. Pop still tried to guide him from the outside. But there is a massive difference between a message after a game and a coach standing beside you during the storm. A text can advise. A sideline presence can command. That difference became visible in the final. Every time the Spurs lost control, every time Wemby looked frustrated, every time the team failed to settle itself, fans wondered the same thing. Would this have happened if Popovich had been right there? Maybe not. Maybe the result would have been the same, but the feeling would have been different. And in championship basketball, feeling matters. Stability matters. Leadership matters. The Spurs discovered that the hard way. The moment the reputation started to shift, before the finals walk-off, before the national anthem debate, before the post-game quotes became viral clips, there was another moment that changed how people watched Victor Wembanyama. The ejection. It happened in the playoffs, when Wembanyama tried to clear space and caught Naz Reid with a hard elbow. The officials reviewed it, called a flagrant 2, and sent him to the locker room. Just like that, the Spurs lost their franchise player in a critical game. For a player as gifted as Wemby, that moment mattered. Not because it made him a villain, not because it erased everything brilliant he had done, but because it showed the world something new. Under pressure, he could be pushed into mistakes. That is dangerous in the playoffs. Opponents notice everything. If they sense frustration, they attack it. If they see emotion boiling over, they test it again. And once that seed is planted, every reaction becomes part of the scouting report. Wembanyama is used to being praised for impossible blocks, deep threes, and defensive dominance. But now people were studying his composure. Could he stay calm when smaller players bumped him? Could he keep control when officials missed calls? Could he lead without letting frustration speak first? Popovich seemed to understand the danger immediately. That is why his presence after the incident mattered so much. It was not just about one foul. It was about teaching a young superstar that greatness is not only what you do with your talent. It is what you do when anger tries to take the wheel. And in that moment, the NBA saw Wemby was still learning. The controversy that took over the finals. Then came the national anthem conversation, and suddenly the finals were no longer just about basketball. Cameras caught Wembanyama standing with his arms crossed during the anthem before Game 1. Some fans saw it as disrespectful. Others defended him, pointing out that he is from France and may not view American pregame customs the same way American-born players do. But once the image hit social media, nuance disappeared fast. That is how modern sports works. One frame becomes a debate, one posture becomes a statement, one moment becomes a national argument. The situation grew even louder when Wemby was later not seen on the court during anthem ceremonies before other games. Again, some people assumed protest, others assumed routine, superstition, timing, or misunderstanding. But because the Spurs were losing and because Wembanyama was already under scrutiny, every small detail felt bigger. Mitch Johnson tried to calm it down. He suggested players sometimes have different routines before games. But the problem was not just the explanation. The problem was the stage. This was the NBA final. Wembanyama was not a bench player in a regular season game. He was the face of San Antonio, the league's future, and one of the most watched athletes in the world. When you are that visible, silence does not protect you. It creates space for others to write the story, and that is exactly what happened. The conversation moved from body language to politics, from politics to Popovich, and from Popovich to whether Wembanyama had been influenced in ways fans did not fully understand. Fair or unfair, the image damage had begun when criticism became a firestorm. Jason Whitlock did not simply criticize Victor Wembanyama. He aimed straight at Gregg Popovich. That is what made the story explode. Instead of treating Wemby's behavior as the mistake of a young superstar under pressure, Whitlock framed it as something deeper. He suggested Popovich's influence had shaped Wembanyama in ways that were now showing up on the biggest stage. It was a sharp accusation, and it turned a basketball controversy into a culture debate almost overnight. That framing was powerful because Popovich has always been more than a coach. He has been outspoken, principled, and unafraid to discuss issues beyond basketball. For some fans, that made him admirable. For others, it made him a target. So when Wemby's anthem moments became controversial, critics immediately connected them back to Pop. But the more interesting question is not whether Whitlock was right. The more important question is what happens when a young superstar is shaped by a powerful mentor, then suddenly has to face the world without that mentor standing beside him. Wembanyama was caught in the middle. Too talented to ignore, too young to fully control every narrative, too famous to make small mistakes quietly. And Popovich was caught in a painful position too. He was still close enough to care, still involved enough to guide, but no longer on the sideline where his authority once lived. That is the part that made the criticism sting. Pop could text, Pop could visit. Pop could appear in the film room and remind everyone what Spurs basketball was supposed to mean. But he could not stop every emotional reaction in real time. He could not grab Wemby before the cameras did. He could not control the story once the footage was already moving across social media. That is why this controversy became bigger than one player. It became a referendum on San Antonio's entire transition. For years, the Spurs were viewed as the league's model organization. Quiet, disciplined, stable, mature. Suddenly, their young face of the franchise was being debated as careless, misunderstood, emotional, or even disrespectful, depending on who was talking. And when a franchise built on control loses control of the narrative, the damage spreads fast. The criticism hurt because it was not just about Wemby. It was about the entire Spurs culture being questioned at the exact moment it looked most vulnerable. Brunson became everything Wemby was not yet. While Wembanyama became the center of controversy, Jalen Brunson became the image of composure. That contrast defined the finals. Brunson did not have Wemby's height. He did not have his wingspan. He did not block shots from impossible angles or change the geometry of the floor. But when the series reached its most important moments, Brunson looked completely ready. He controlled tempo. He punished mistakes. He stayed calm when the game tightened. He never looked rushed by the pressure. He never looked overwhelmed by the stage. And in Game 5, he delivered the kind of performance that changes legacies. For Wembanyama, that was the painful lesson. Talent can make you historic, but poise makes you a champion. The Knicks trusted Brunson because he gave them the same thing every possession: clarity. The Spurs looked to Wemby and saw greatness, but also exhaustion, frustration, and moments where the burden seemed too heavy. That does not mean Brunson is better as a long-term player. It means he was better prepared for that night, and that mattered. Because finals basketball is not always about the most gifted player. Sometimes it is about the player who can slow the game down when everyone else feels it speeding up. Brunson had that. Every time San Antonio made a run, he found a response. A mid-range jumper, a patient drive, a pass that punished the help defense, a possession that reminded the Knicks they were still in control. Wembanyama, on the other hand, was still learning what it means to be the emotional center of a championship team. When he was dominant, the Spurs looked unbeatable. But when he got tired, when the Knicks dragged him into difficult actions, when the offense stalled, San Antonio had no second identity strong enough to rescue them. That is where Brunson's maturity became devastating. He did not need to be the biggest player on the floor, he just needed to be the steadiest. And in the finals, steady beats spectacular. The finals often become a mirror. They show you exactly where you are. For Brunson, the mirror showed a leader ready to carry New York to history. For Wembanyama, it showed a generational player who still had to learn how to turn dominance into control. That is not an insult. That is the process. But it is a process the entire world saw in real time. The Spurs offseason problem. Now, San Antonio has to answer the hardest question in basketball. How do you build around a generational player before pressure starts breaking the structure around him? Wembanyama is the future. That part is obvious. But the pieces around him are more complicated. De'Aaron Fox gives the Spurs speed, scoring, and star power, but his final struggles raised uncomfortable questions. When a player with a massive contract disappears in the biggest moments, the front office has to evaluate fit, responsibility, and long-term trust. Fox is too talented to dismiss, but talent alone is not the issue anymore. The question is whether he can be the kind of guard who steadies Wemby when defenses become cruel and possessions become heavy. Then there is Dylan Harper, a young guard with real promise and real ambition. If he feels underused, San Antonio cannot ignore it. Young talent needs opportunity, but championship teams also need hierarchy. Finding that balance will be one of the Spurs' biggest challenges. If Harper grows into a major piece, the Spurs may have another creator who can reduce pressure on Wemby. But if his role remains unclear, frustration could become another quiet problem inside a locker room already carrying emotional weight. And above everything sits the coaching structure. Mitch Johnson proved he can lead, but can he command the room when the season turns ugly? Can he challenge Wembanyama the way Popovich once could? Can he build his own authority while Pop remains the most respected voice in the building? That is a delicate situation. The Spurs must protect Wemby, but not baby him. They must support him, but also hold him accountable. They must build a roster that gives him help, but also teaches him that leadership is not only about numbers. This offseason is not just about trades, contracts, or rotations. It is about identity. Are the Spurs still Pop Spurs, living off the culture of the past? Or are they becoming Wemby's Spurs, with a new voice, new pressure, and new rules? That transition has to be handled carefully, because if the franchise moves too fast, it can lose the foundation. But if it moves too slowly, it can trap Wembanyama inside a structure that no longer fully fits, because the next time San Antonio reaches the finals, excuses will be gone. The league has seen the blueprint. Opponents will test Wemby physically, emotionally, and mentally. The Spurs have one offseason to make sure he is ready for all of it. The future is still his. Here is the truth that can get lost in all the noise. Victor Wembanyama is still one of the most extraordinary players basketball has ever seen. One bad finals does not change that. One walk-off does not erase his talent. One controversy does not cancel the fact that he can impact the game in ways almost nobody in NBA history can match. But his image has changed. Before this finals run, Wemby was treated like the perfect future superstar. After it, he is still the future, but now with questions attached. Can he handle criticism? Can he control emotion? Can he lead teammates through pressure? Can he accept defeat with grace? Can he turn pain into maturity? Those are the questions that follow him now, and maybe that is necessary. Every great player eventually loses the innocence of being universally loved. LeBron went through it, Jordan went through it, Kobe went through it. Every superstar who becomes big enough eventually becomes controversial enough. The difference is what they do next. Because the NBA does not judge legends only by their best nights. It judges them by their response to the nights that nearly break them. The finals were Wembanyama's first real collision with that truth. He had been praised for so long as an alien, a unicorn, a future face of the league, that people almost forgot he was still a young player learning how to carry the emotional weight of a franchise. Now that illusion is gone. From this point forward, every reaction will be studied differently. If he walks away from a tough loss, people will remember the tunnel. If he shows frustration toward officials, people will remember the ejection. If he says the wrong thing after defeat, people will remember the dominated quote. That is the price of superstardom. Your past moments follow you until your future moments replace them. And that is also Wemby's opportunity. He does not need to argue with every critic. He does not need to explain every frame. He does not need to win the internet. He needs to grow so clearly that the conversation has no choice but to change. The most powerful answer to criticism is not a statement. It is behavior repeated over time. Next season, the league will not just be watching his stats. They will be watching his body language. They will watch how he treats opponents after losses. They will watch how he handles hard fouls. They will watch whether he lifts teammates or disappears into frustration. They will watch whether pain makes him colder or wiser. That is the real test now. Wembanyama now has a choice. He can treat this finals as an embarrassment, or he can treat it as the most valuable education of his career. He can fight the narrative, or he can outgrow it. He can become defensive, or he can become undeniable. The NBA will be watching, fans will be watching, critics will be waiting. But if Wemby responds the right way, this loss may not be the beginning of his downfall. It may be the beginning of the version of him the league should fear most. The lesson San Antonio cannot waste. The Spurs do not need panic. They need clarity. This final showed them the truth. Talent got them close, but maturity will decide whether they finish the job. Wembanyama can be the foundation of a dynasty, but only if San Antonio builds the right structure around him. That means stronger late-game execution, clearer leadership, better emotional discipline, and a locker room where accountability is not optional. Strategically, the Spurs must solve three problems. First, they need a dependable offensive structure when teams drag Wemby away from the rim and force others to create. Second, they need guards who can stay composed when defenses tighten. Third, they need a leadership chain that does not depend entirely on Popovich rescuing the room from the outside. Pop's legacy is secure, but the Spurs cannot ask a legendary coach to be everywhere forever. At some point, the culture he built has to live through other people. Mitch Johnson must grow. Wembanyama must grow. The roster must. And for Wemby, the lesson is deeply human. Greatness is not perfection. Greatness is learning how to respond when the world sees you fail. It is staying respectful when you are hurt. It is controlling emotion when pride is wounded. It is understanding that leadership means your reaction matters as much as your performance. That is what San Antonio has to teach him now. Not how to block more shots. Not how to shoot from deeper range. Not how to become more viral. He already has the gifts. What he needs next is the quiet strength that separates stars from champions. The ability to lose with dignity. The ability to listen when criticism burns. The ability to stand in front of cameras after heartbreak and speak with humility instead of frustration. This is also a lesson for the Spurs as an organization. They cannot assume Wembanyama will become a champion simply because he is talented enough. No dynasty is built on talent alone. It is built on habits, trust, sacrifice, communication, and the willingness to correct small problems before they become public disasters. The finals gave San Antonio a warning. If they ignore it, the same cracks will show again. If they accept it, this pain can become fuel. He does not need to become less competitive. He needs to become more centered, more patient, more aware of the image he sends to teammates, opponents, and fans. This story should not be about destroying a young star. It should be about growth, peace, accountability, and the difficult journey from gifted player to true leader. If Wembanyama learns from this, San Antonio's heartbreak could become the foundation of something powerful. The tunnel walk, the criticism, the blown leads, the painful press conference, all of it can become part of the lesson. Not a permanent stain, but a turning point. Because the greatest players are not the ones who never fall. They are the ones who come back wiser, calmer, stronger, and more responsible than they were before. Now, tell us what you think. If you believe Wemby will win a championship with the Spurs, type 1. If you think San Antonio still needs major changes, type 2. Like this video, share it with another NBA fan, and subscribe for more deep basketball stories.